Yeah, basically Aaron and I decided, I don't know what he's told you, we've decided to split the presentation. So I'm going to deal with the history leading up to the conflict in 1988. He's going to do the conflict in 1988 to 1994. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the Artsakh government, how that exists. Then we're going to talk about the present conflict, and I'm going to focus on the regional actors from the Asian side, and he'll focus on the regional actors from the Russia, Europe, America side. So hopefully we can finish this in 18 hours, and we'll be able to go home on Thursday night. So, all right. So,
and by the way, and I don't know if we have any rules here, Zach, but I mean, if ultimately we break this up into two pieces, I don't think that's a bad thing either, because there's cool stuff.
The rules is this Wednesday is, outside of ancient text, is a very lively discussion. Is a little bit different from how we do Saturday and Sunday, where people are engaged more. And since this is such a hot topic right now, so people can present sides and tell their opinions, and it's okay to be not combative, but throw maybe
well, yeah, but what I'm saying is, if we don't go through well, actually, we will not be going through everything tonight. But as whatever we stop, if people want to keep going, I mean, we could do another session.
Yeah,
another Wednesday or whatever.
Well, we can do it next Wednesday. I can move my Josephus Flavius to the following Wednesday. Not a big deal.
Sure. Okay. Cool.
I also want to stay a little bit up front. Again, I can't speak for Aaron on this, but my bias is slightly towards Armenia. So take what I say with a bit of salt from that perspective. Yeah, so here we go. All right, so...
well, excuse me, Richard. Why? Why is your bias towards Armenia?
I see a lot of similarities, actually, between the Armenian situation and the Jewish situation. And so there's a lot of imprinting there.
Now, I should have bias towards Armenia because I grew up in Pasadena, California, which is a massive Armenian population. A lot of good friends of mine. I played. We used to always do this. We lied about bringing in people to homomins, which are like little clubs, so you could play chess, basketball, hockey, all kinds of stuff. So I had like a lot of friends for I still do, but I mean, so I grew up in a extremely Armenian enclave in Pasadena, Glendale, California, and then Fresno is far north, where you would have, that's like literally like the heart and center of Armenia, or of Armenians outside of Armenia for, actually, I'm sure it still is.
So this is going to be a very biased.
No. I don't have that bias.
I know.
Guys,
but I just want to put it out there. I enjoy being in Azerbaijan. I enjoy talking to Azerbaijanis. I do like Azerbaijani culture. It's just that I disagree with this political position.
Yeah. So I don't have the bias on the Armenian side because I never really did the research like I've done for this. So since I did that, I always feel like an obligation to be not biased. So that's sort of where I can, just so you guys.
Okay.
So basically, if we look at history, we have the first Armenian Empire, you can see on the right-hand side, which existed at roughly 69 BC. It was led by King Tigran the Great, and you can see that the central Armenian area that was under his control is indicated by the orange. He expanded and conquered the territories in the pink. The other territories that are either brown or yellow, those are territories that were either vassals or in historical relationships with Armenia, but were not part of Armenia. So Armenia was actually a bifurcated state, which is why, for example, in the 1500s, as we know from our Crusader days, Cilicia exists as an Armenian state, despite it being significantly removed from Armenia proper. On the left-hand side, you see the Bagratid period. Now, roughly at around 1000 BC, 1000 CE, there is a distinction that begins to develop between the Armenian perception of history here and the Azerbaijani perception of history here. The Armenian argument is that these states that you can see throughout 1000 CE are actually independent, separate states that have agreements of vassalhood or suzerainty to the neighboring empires, right? Especially in this 1000 CE period, Georgia was an expanding empire, and so these states would have been loyal to Georgia. In the 13th century, they would have been loyal to the Mongols, so forth, so on, but they had their own sort of internal functioning and rulership that was to a certain degree independent. From the Azerbaijani perspective, these areas were controlled by local lords. Those local lords swore loyalty to the greater empires and therefore did not have functional independence. The textual information from this period is unclear as to which of these perceptions is accurate. Now, one of the things, and you'll see it on all the future maps as well, is that I put a black circle around where Artsakh is, as a general Nagorno-Karabakh region is, because it's hard to tell on all these maps where it is if I don't circle it. So if every time you see the black circle, that's where the region is that we're talking about. So you can see both Azerbaijanis and Armenians agree that around 1000 CE, there were Armenian lords controlling the territory of Nagorno-Karabakh. But the difference would be that the Armenians would argue that this was an independent territory in a suzerain relationship with central Armenia, that was the Bagratid Kingdom of Armenia, that was based in Ani, and that Bagratid Kingdom of Armenia was independent of Georgia and the other neighboring countries. The Azerbaijanis would argue that no, these were subject to Georgian leadership and therefore were not independent.
Excuse me, could you just slow down a bit?
Okay. So at this period in the 1000 CE, we have the ascendancy of Georgia. You can see Georgia in the upper left-hand side. This, unfortunately, I couldn't find a map in English, so this map is in German. So it says Georgian, right? So that's Georgia. And Georgia actually controls Egrigi, Abkhazia, Kartleti, Kakheti, Karetian. All these areas that are semi-independent are under Georgian control or Georgian vassalhood. So you can see the Georgians are sort of surrounding Armenia. And it was true that at this point, Georgia extended significant power over Armenia. But the question is whether Armenia was independent in a vassal relationship with Georgia, or whether Armenia was part of the Georgian territories and was just a lord and was just run by a number of Armenian lords who themselves pledged loyalty to the Georgian king. So that's this distinction in this period of history. I also wanted to point out that this is the first time that we have anything similar to Azerbaijani-ness coming into existence. They don't use the term Azerbaijani at this point, but we're talking about Turkic control in the region of Azerbaijan, and that's Shirvan. And you can see Shirvan on the map circled in the red. Most Azerbaijanis today consider their kingdom, consider their republic to be a descendant of the Shirvan kingdom.
Does that apply for both Azerbaijan and Armenia?
Armenians consider Shirvan to be Turkic, Persiatic, but the Armenians don't argue that the Shirvan Shahs are an Iranic from Iran, Iranic sort of governance, and that the Azerbaijani ethnicity doesn't come into existence until the 20th century, when the Tatar people are renamed as Azerbaijani by the Soviet government.
Richard?
Yes.
A couple questions. One is, Azeri is a Turkic language.
Correct.
Right? Did the Shirvan, what was the language of Shirvan?
It would have been Persian.
Not Turkic. So they were not.
But the thing is that we know that most Turkic kingdoms at this period in time spoke Persian. The use of Turkish as a language of governance was practically zero until like the 1500s. And even then, it was only slowly phased in. So the fact that Persian,
but Turkic was a living language, but further east. I guess the Turkic language in Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan,
right?
Those were all speaking Turkic, right?
Absolutely. But when they started ruling over people, right? Even in those areas, the settled populations in Uzbekistan were Persian speaking. It was the nomadic populations who were Turkic speaking. So when they began to rule over territories in cities, all their bureaucrats were Persian speaking. And so they ruled in Persian.
Can I add something to this?
Yes.
At this period of time, they were not only speaking Persian, but they were ethnically Aryan, Indo-European people, Indo-Aryan peoples. Turkinization happened like from 11th century, like maybe like
exactly.
50. It just started, but and the massive Turkic population moved in, migrated. So at this point, not only they speaking Persian dialect, but they also ethnically they mixed with the indigenous population of Lezgins, but they are also
Absolutely
Persian.
correct.
One other question, Richard.
Sure.
On the of those which of those on the left-hand map, which of those elements are part of the Georgian Empire?
Any of those countries, with the exception of Dorduskin, any of those countries that are sort of in that black or purplish sort of color. So Taron was ethnically Georgian, but had some relations with Armenia. It's a little complicated because it was Armenian rulers with a majority Georgian population. Tau Korjetia, that area was Georgian. Kartli was Georgian. Kakheti was ethnically Georgian and was slowly coming under Georgian control. Tbilisi, which you can see is the emirate of Tbilisi, was actually a Muslim ruled, Armenian majority, Georgian vassal state. You have this very sort of fluid thing going on about the relationships here, and unfortunately the documentation doesn't make it clear what the exact relationships were between these various states.
Thanks.
So one of the things that starts developing as we move into the Turkic period, right? Because as Greg mentioned, the Turks only invade this area in the middle and later part of the 11th century. As we move into the Turkic-controlled period, the amount of territory controlled by Christians continually diminishes. And one of the areas, interestingly, that stays under Christian rulership are what are called these melikdoms. Now, melik comes from Arabic, meaning king or rulership. And so there were both Turkic melikdoms, Persian melikdoms, and Christian melikdoms. But the longest lasting Christian melikdoms were actually called the Khamsa, meaning five, that existed in the region of Nagorno-Karabakh. You can see the map of Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast as defined during the Soviet period, and you can see it's divided into the five meliks. And you can see that most of the territory of Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast was controlled by these meliks. Now, again, there's a question as to how much autonomy these melikdoms had. It's clear that they were subordinated to the Safavid Persian Empire, which was controlling the general area. But it's not clear how much independence they had. It's quite clear, though, that these were ruled by ethnic Armenians. You can see their flag, which has Armenian lettering on it, as well as the cross, which was a symbol of their Christianity. We also have letters to the Khamsa from other Christian states that specifically call that territory Armenia and that it is ruled by Armenians. We have no censuses or clear population estimates, but travelers who went through that area argued that it was a majority Armenian area. That is in contrast to the majority of the area around around the Khamsa melikdoms, which was majority Muslim. Unfortunately for us, geographers did not make clear the ethnic mix of the religious individuals. So we don't know what percentage would be Persian speaking. We don't know what percentage would be Turkic speaking. My intuition is that because the Safavid Persian Empire was ruled in Persian, the majority of these people, even if they were Turkic, like the Safavids themselves were Turkic, would have been Persian speaking anyway. But they may have ethnically identified as Turkic if we can anachronistically apply that concept.
May I ask if the term Turkic is that a whole host of languages and people? And
yeah, I would say like think of Turkic the same way you would think of Romance, right? There's a variety. I would say it's even more it's even more restricted than Romance. Think of it like Iberian, right? You've got Castilian Spanish, you've got Aragonese, you've got Galician, you've got Portuguese. These are more or less mutually intelligible, and they clearly come from the same ancestry. These are all Oghuz Turkish languages, but they're not all exactly the same. So there's actually a spectrum, and this spectrum still exists between Baku in the east and Istanbul in the west of all the Oghuz Turkish languages in that area. There are slow changes in verb conjugation, in vocabulary, in all these sorts of things. But generally speaking, a person from one side can understand somebody from the other side. It just would sound very strange to them.
With difficulties, I think, from what I understand. They
Richard,
understand, like maybe half they understand from each other. From
I
the
mean, it
like
depends on the person.
contemporary Turkish is the Ottoman Turks dialect, but you know, Azeri is a little bit different. You know, I actually have seen Azerbaijan talk to Turkish people. You know, just I have Turkish friends and I have Azeri friends, and they spoke to each other. They understood about half. They could communicate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Richard,
No,
question?
wait. But one thing I just want to comment on that. One of the major issues that Azerbaijanis and Turks have communicating today is that the Turkish language underwent a major reform in 1920 as Ataturk purged a lot of the Arabic words that they historically shared with the Azeri, and the Azerbaijani language was heavily influenced by Russian because of the Russian conquest. And so the intelligibility would have been higher at this point in time than it would be in the present day. Marika, your question?
Yeah, was this area important for trade? I mean, was part of the route or was, I mean, this was people who were moving around, or these were settlements, or?
It was not terribly important to trade. There definitely was trade that went through here. This was one of the Silk Road routes, but it wasn't that important to trade because it was very mountainous, right? So it was very hard to get through this area. And so this area basically ended up being the border point between various different empires. You can even see on this map that this is the edge between the Safavid Persian Empire and the Georgian states. The Georgian states were semi-independent. They paid vassal money to the Safavids, but the relationship was very fractious.
Now Armenian, I believe, is a Indo-European language, but quite different from quite distant from Persian.
Absolutely, there's no mutual intelligibility between Persian and Armenian.
And so these people the ethnicity was defined by being Christian and speaking Armenian.
Exactly that. There were other Christian minorities in this area, like the Assyrians, for example, whose identifying feature was that they spoke Aramaic. But generally speaking, the people in this area who were Christian were either Georgians, Armenians, or Assyrians, or Rum, which is Orthodox. But so like based on the language you spoke in the church you went to, that was how you were identified. It was much less about some sort of blood pact or identity. It was religious faith. So we mentioned that the Safavid Empire took this area because we looked at the Khamsa Melikdoms. The Safavid Empire was based in modern-day Azerbaijan and was led by Shah Abbas in 1501, and he conquered a large territory. That territory expanded over the period, but the height of the empire was the borders at roughly 1600 CE under the reign of it was founded by Shah Ismail. This was under the reign of Shah Abbas. So Shah Abbas was actually fighting in 1604 against the Ottoman Empire. The border between the Ottoman Empire and the Safavid Empire is, you can see, very close to the border today between Turkey and Iran. And so the two of them fought over this territory, and the Ottomans were making great advances into the Caucasian territories. In order to prevent the Ottomans from taking these territories and replenishing their food stores from all of the foodstuffs and grains from the cities throughout the Caucasus region, Georgians, Circassians, and Armenians were deported from across the southern Caucasian area to central Iran. So we know that altogether it's about 500,000 individuals. Circassians are Muslim, Georgians and Armenians are Christian, but these areas were completely liquidated and the populations moved to Isfahan, which is in central Persia. This is, under the Armenian argument, the main reason why the majority of the Caucasus region was severely depopulated of Armenians, and Muslims became the majority in the area. From the Azerbaijani side, the argument is that Muslims were already the majority of the area, and this simply solidified it. You can see on the left-hand side a picture of the migrants, of course, in better shape than they actually would have been, having been ripped from their lands. So when the Safavid Empire fell, you had the Afsharid period, led by God, why is the name escaping me? The Afsharid Shah, Nader Shah, Nader Shah, who was the one Afsharid Shah, and he was considered the Alexander the Great of Iran. He fought wars throughout the Persian sphere of influence. And sorry?
No, I'm sorry, I just spoke.
Yeah, he fought wars throughout the Persian sphere of influence in the early to mid 1700s, and he was able to conquer a great many territories. This, of course, made it difficult for the various Turkic groups throughout the Southern Caucasus to maintain independence because of Nader Shah's attacks. Now, there were pretenders to the throne that wanted to remove the Afsharids and put in the Qajar dynasty. So the Khans, or the local Turkic rulers of the southern part of the Caucasus, started to ally with the Qajar in order to remove the threat of the Afsharids. So one of these Khans was in charge of the area called Karabakh, or the Black Garden. Karabakh extended from what was to its west, which was Erivan Khanat, and in the east you can see other Khanats like the Shekhi Khanat, or Baku Khanat. All these were local city-states controlled by Turkic sovereigns who at least nominally supported the Persian ruler. Once the Qajars were able to defeat the Afsharids in 1747, the Khanate of Karabakh was officially inaugurated by the Khans of Karabakh. Now, Karabakh is composed of two regions. In the western side, you have Upper Karabakh, the highlands of Karabakh, which is a mountainous area, and in the eastern part, you have the lowlands of Karabakh. Now, the Russian term Nagorno-Karabakh, Nagorno is Russian, meaning has mountains, Nagorny, right? Mountainous, and Karabakh was the name of this overall region. So when we talk about Nagorno-Karabakh, we're talking about the western part of this former Khanate, right? Now, because the mountains are the best defensible position, this was why the Khans wanted to take over this territory. In this period of time, the Melikdams that we talked about were still relatively powerful, and therefore the Khan of Karabakh needed their assistance in order to rise up and support the Qajar against the Afsharids and get their quasi-independence. It also happened that because the mountainous area is the area where the Armenians dominate population-wise, they were able to be an active part in the construction of the Karabakh Khanat in the early days of the Khanate, right? So one of the things that the first Khans of Karabakh Khanat begin to do is they build the city of Shusha. Shusha is located in the heart of the mountain ridge, and it's an excellent place to put a fortress. So the Khans took many of the people from the neighboring towns, mostly Armenians, to be the population of this city of Shusha. And then he was able to withstand attacks from the Qajar. You can see on the left-hand side some of the important buildings today of Shusha, including the one not on the lower left, but just above it, which looks like a house with a sort of orange door. That is the house of the Shekhi Khan, of the Karabakh Khan. So the Karabakh Khan had this house. This is where he governed from, while Karabakh Khanat included all these territories. You can see that there are Armenian churches, like in the upper left. You can see that there are mosques, as in the upper right. The city of Shusha was very diverse until the fall of the Soviet Union, in terms of its Armenian and Muslim populations, even though there were massacres of one or the other periodically through this city. So this sort of situation where the Qajar Empire of the Persians controlled the Southern Caucasus region continued through the late 1700s into the early 1800s, And these various khanates had their quasi-independence, quasi-sovereignty to the Qajars until the Russians decided to invade. Now, the Russians invaded in two waves. There were two wars against the Khans and their Persian sponsors. The first one pulled all the way, moved from the 1801 border, you can see at the Caucasus Mountains, to take the eastern part of Georgia and most of Azerbaijan. And the second part took most of Armenia. So by 1832, I guess it's a typo there. In 1832, the Treaty of Turkmenchai was signed, and all of the Southern Caucasus was now in Russian control. Armenians and Georgians assisted the Russians in their southward invasions, seeing themselves as allies in Christendom. And in fact, it was the Georgians choosing to change their vassalhood from the Persian Empire to the Russians in 1801 that made it possible for the Russians to expand further southward.
Richard, what was so important for the Soviet Union to take this area? I mean, was it?
Well, it was still the Russian Tsardom at this time. The reason that the Russians were interested in this territory was that it gave them direct access. It gave them direct access to the Middle East, and it allowed them to establish their power over Iran. Because there were a number of other treaties that accompanied Treaty of Gulistan, Treaty of Turkmenchai, which forced Iran to become increasingly a sphere of influence of the Russians. It also allowed them to repel the Turks more effectively, because the mountains were no longer an effective Turkish position that the Turkish could support with Muslim Georgians or laws that were in the western part of Georgia.
Thank you.
So when the Russians took this territory, the majority of the territory of what is now Armenia, which was at that time Erivan Khanat, right? Erivan is the Muslim pronunciation of Yerevan, which is the main city of that area. The Muslim population of Erivan Khanat was roughly 80%, and the Armenian population was only 20%. By contrast, in the region of Nagorno-Karabakh, right, this mountainous Karabakh area, it was over 85% Armenian. So what Russia ended up doing was that they started promoting the migration of Armenians. They started promoting the migration of Armenians into Erivan Khanat and into the Karabakh region additionally in order to support those groups. So you can see here, this is the Armenian migration into the Russian Empire, the Armenification of Erivan Khanat. And you can see there are several waves, especially in the 1820s, that lead to Armenian communities in the southern part of Georgia and the northern part of Armenia. And then in 1828 to 1829, you have large-scale migration from Persia of Persian Armenians into Erivan Khanat. And while the population of Muslims was still growing in this area numerically, as a percentage, it was sharply decreasing, such that by the census of 1897, the only full-scale census of the Russian Empire prior to World War II, the percentage of Armenians in Erivan Khanat was already the majority. And Muslims had shrunk to 33% of the population. 37% of the population, even though, as we said, when the Russians conquered the territory less than 100 years earlier, Muslims were 80% of the population. The Azerbaijanis argue historically that Erivan Khanat should have been an Azerbaijani territory, but because of the Russians, only now has it become Armenian majority. The Armenian argument is that if Shah Abbas had not deported all of those Armenians back in 1604, then Erivan Khanat would have always been Armenian. So if you look at the 1897 census a little bit more in detail, you can see first on the left side map where Azerbaijanis are in light blue and Armenians are in this palish green. I wish the colors stood out better, but that's sort of the situation. The Azerbaijanis were much more spread out in the territory, and the Armenians were much more concentrated in the cities, many of them having been educated either in Persia or in the Ottoman Empire, and therefore wanted to be closer to the urban environment. If you look at this color-coded version on the right-hand side, you can see the dark black areas, which are Armenian majority areas, the light black areas, which are Armenian plurality areas. You can see the dark red areas, which are Turkish majority areas, and the pink areas, which are Turkic plurality areas. Remember, of course, that there are other minority ethnicities that are not Turkic, that are not Armenian, such as Iranic people, Lesgin people, North Caucasian people, Georgians, and the Georgians, of course, on this map are indicated with yellow, and plurality Georgians in tan. So you can see the part of that there are parts of Karabakh that that have an Azerbaijani majority, and Azerbaijani plurality, and parts that have an Armenian plurality. But the parts that make up Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast in the Soviet period are almost exclusively those with an Armenian plurality. And you can see that on the more in-depth map on the left-hand side. Okay, so then, of course, you have the Armenian genocide. So now, up to the Armenian genocide, you can see these are the borders of the Russian Tsardom and the Ottoman Empire. There are 8 historical provinces of Armenia based on that really large map that I showed you, right, of Tigran, who conquered this large empire. And of those, Kars and Erivan were part of Russia, and Nagorno-Karabakh was integrated into the government of Elizabethpol. Of course, the genocide wiped out a significant percentage of the Armenians on the Turkish side of the border, here on the Ottoman side of the border, but it left relatively intact what was on the Russian side of the border. The one exception, of course, is that in 1917, when the Russian Civil War broke out, the Ottomans pushed their advantage, led by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, and took Kars Oblast and half of Batum Oblast and parts of Erivan Governorate from the Russians and incorporated them into modern Turkey, which is why the Russian-Turkish border doesn't look like this today. So one of the things that develops throughout the one of the things that develops is that during the Russian Revolution, you have all of these Transcaucasian republics fighting for independence. And so at first you have a unity between the Georgians, Armenians, and Azerbaijanis, but it breaks down after only a few months, and they each try to establish their own countries. The Armenians are able to take the territory of Zangezur, which gives them a land connection to Iran. However, before General Ozanian is able to take Nagorno-Karabakh and integrate it into Armenia, he is told to stand down by the British, who say that they will enforce Armenian control over Nagorno-Karabakh without a war. The British do not hold up to that end and instead gift that territory to Azerbaijan. In 1924, the Soviet Union, having reintegrated those territories with a Bolshevik invasion in 1921, they decided to make Nagorno-Karabakh region an autonomous oblast. What that means is that in the Soviet system, you had different levels of hierarchy. And so you had the Supreme Soviet, which was in control of the entire country. You had the 15 republics, of which Armenian Soviet Socialist Republic and Azerbaijan Soviet Socialist Republic were independent republics. And within those republics, you could have autonomous oblasts, which are territories that had their own independent government, but reported in turn to the government of the Soviet Republic. So it was an Armenian-run autonomous oblast under Azerbaijan SSR. And it remained in that position from 1924 until 1988. Now, one of the things that's worth pointing out is that during the Soviet period, there was discrimination by both sides against the members of the other. And of course, during the wars of the Transcaucasian period, from 1918 to 1921, there were numerous ethnic cleansings on both sides. The Armenians ethnically cleansed, for example, the Azerbaijani people of Syunik region or Zangezur region. Syunik is the Armenian name, Zangezur is the Azerbaijani name. There were cleansings from across Azerbaijan. You can see on this map here, any of the cleansings in yellow are primarily those that occurred between 1918 and 1921. There are some that occurred a little bit later, but throughout this period, you have ethnic cleansings of Armenians from Azerbaijan. In fact, Armenians were a large percentage of the population in Baku during this period, before the expulsions began. Conversely, on the Armenian side, there were expulsions throughout the Soviet period. You can see on this graph, just for context, in the 1897 census, the Muslims, which includes non-Turkic people, but the Muslims were a total of 300,000 individuals. So you can see that there's a sharp drop in this period of over 2/3 by the
Richard,
time of the first Armenian census in 1926.
a quick question, Richard.
Yeah.
This territory that's in yellow on the lower left that is part of Azerbaijan, but
Sure.
it's separated between Armenia and Turkey itself. How do they actually rule that area without a land bridge?
Absolutely. Okay, so during the Soviet period, this was much less of an issue, right?
Sure, of course.
During the Soviet period, there was unification. The region you're talking about is called Nakhchivan. Nakhchivan was a region that was 60% Azerbaijani, 40% Armenian before 1918. Today, it is practically all Azerbaijani, and there are numerous removals of Armenians from that area, as you can see from the map. The way that it was ruled is that it was an autonomous oblast as well, right? So Nagorno-Karabakh, we talked about, was an autonomous oblast that was ruled by Armenians. Because of the functional difference in location and distance from Baku, Nakhchivan was an autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic that was ruled by the local Azeri. In fact, the rulers of Nakhchivan were in the 1970s and onwards from the Aliyev family. This is the same Aliyev family that is today ruling Azerbaijan as a whole. And since Nakhchivan was the scene of some of the harshest Armenian expulsions from the territory of Azerbaijan, the positions of the Aliyev family towards Armenians, at least from the Armenian perspective, are quite negative on the possibility of possible reconciliation. One of the things that is interesting about this Azerbaijan map that I'd like to point out is that you can see that there are some areas that are tan and vertically hatched. Those are territories from which Armenians previously had lived, but were deported by Shah Abbas in 1604. All right. But as you can see, as I said, but you can see from both sides, I wish I could find an Armenian map that shows the expulsion of the Azerbaijani people. But the closest I could get were the census numbers. And you can see these are census numbers from the Republic of Armenia in the Soviet Socialist Republic and the Independent Republic of Armenia after 1991. And you can see the numbers of Azerbaijani people generally decrease, and the yellow line, which is the percentage of Azerbaijanis as a total, of the total population of Armenia, basically goes to zero. There are, sorry?
Sorry, question.
Sure.
What's the big difference between Armenians and Azerbaijans? I mean, they look different, life is different, is religious so important, or how do they differentiate so much? I mean,
They differentiate each other very clearly based on religion. In terms of how they look different, it's one of those things where if you're not from the region, everybody looks the same. But if you are from the region, you see the difference immediately, and it's like how could you confuse us? It's that sort of thing. So,
I mean, the one thing I would say is this is a very Balkan-like conflict. It doesn't have as many. It's not as much 4D chess. Well, with the outside actors, it has the same kind of 4D chess that Yugoslavia had just organically without outside actors, right? Does that make any sense or no?
And I mean, there are a lot of minorities that are not Armenian or Azerbaijani that also play into this. Like, for example, in the southern part of Azerbaijan, you have the Talish, and the Talish have always been pro-Azerbaijani. But then you have the Kurds, who are also, the Talish are an Iranic people, but you also have the Kurds, who are more pro-Armenian. So you have a lot of different, sides playing in this that are minorities that I'm just sort of skipping over because their contribution is not as big as the big two. But no, they live in different ways. Of course, one of the main differences is that because Armenians are Christian, they eat pork. So that's a clearly distinguishing factor just in lifestyle. And it's also a perception of history, right? Azerbaijanis consider themselves to have been a Turkic people who had a long-standing control of the area because they had all of these khanates during the Safavid period and especially during the Qajar period. And the Armenians see themselves as a beleaguered minority that finally got independence, despite having history in the region for thousands of years. So like you have these very strong identitarian streaks, and people, they feel that way and they dress that way, and like people recognize it. Okay. So now during the Soviet period, if we simplify it, right? You can obviously this is a map from the post-Soviet period, but it's actually really helpful for the Soviet period. If you see any of the territories that are in dark colors, such as territory number 9, territory number 10 and 11, 12, and 13, those territories are all autonomous Soviet socialist republics during this period, including number 12, which is our Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast. So this is the territory that is, as I said, majority Armenian. In 1988, it was 74% Armenian and 26% Azerbaijani. That Azerbaijani population was increasing during this period, during the Soviet period, because since Azerbaijan was the republic under which Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast sat, Azerbaijan was able to promote the creation of universities and workplaces and other types of developments that would lead Azerbaijani migration into the area. And since Azerbaijan has a larger population than Armenia does, and especially a larger population than Nagorno-Karabakh by orders of magnitude, the slow trickle of Azerbaijanis into the territory was beginning to shift it from an over 80% Armenian area to a less than 80% Armenian area. Of course, as we pointed out, because of the expulsions, Nakhchivan moved from being a 40% Armenian area to a 0% Armenian area. And even Armenian gravestones, like in the area of Julfa, were raised by Heydar Aliyev, I believe in 1993. So, yeah, that's the Soviet period. And there was general peace, for want of a better term, or lack of conflict is probably the easiest way to say it, between the Armenians and the Azerbaijanis on a functional level during the Soviet period, simply because the Soviet Union was strong enough to keep them from fighting with each other. Starting in
Can I ask a question? There's in the Soviet period, was the were the government actually Russians largely, or some Russians?
The governments were largely from these local regions, right? So it was Azerbaijani people who were running Azerbaijan. And when I say Azerbaijani people, I mean in the national sense, not in the ethnic sense.
That they had no risk of insurrection then.
Absolutely. But the thing is that all of the various republics had to report to the Supreme Soviet. In fact, the entire reason that these republics existed was because they had been independent during the Russian Revolutionary period, and it was a form of appeasement to prevent them from trying to secede again. They were given a little bit of local power, so they didn't demand independence.
And by the way, they created they led the Nagorno-Karabakh left in Azerbaijan with the reason to make it much more difficult to secede, and let them fight between each other rather than.
Absolutely, there were numerous cases.
1920s.
Yeah, there were numerous cases where the Soviet Union intentionally created enclaves within the territory of a different republic in order to foment conflict should independence ever arise, as a possible thought. You can also see this with the border between Uzbekistan and Tajikistan today, where there are several Uzbek enclaves in Tajikistan, several Tajik enclaves in Uzbekistan. There are very weird border configurations in several of the Russian oblasts, and it's exactly this reason. So that way there would be an internal conflict between the republics, and therefore they couldn't really seek independence from the Soviet Union. But
Think
starting
of Crimea. Think of Crimea.
No, but Crimea is not.
It was Russian. It was
border
given
is
to
here.
Ukraine.
Yeah, it was
It's
given to
Russian.
Ukraine. Like, yeah, it was an autonomous oblast.
Was there a push to ever teach Russian to the people?
Oh, Russian was the standard language. Everybody in the Soviet Union learned Russian as their dominant language, but they were allowed to speak their local languages as well. So in Azerbaijan Republic, Russian was the official language, but people also spoke Azeri Turkish and their local languages. Like, for example, if they were Talysh, they spoke Talysh. If they were Lezgin, they would speak Lezgic. Like, whatever their ethnicity was. If they were Avar, they spoke Avar. But if you wanted to have an official place in the government, you had to speak Russian. But literally everybody in this region speaks Russian.
Yeah, and they spoke Russian with an accent.
Sorry?
I just want to say that they spoke Russian with a heavy accent, except the very educated class in all of those republics, because the language is so different from Russian. They learn Russian, they speak it well, but they had heavy accent everywhere.
Actually, if
except
you
educated class.
Azeri speak Russian like fluently. It's the Armenians, because it's such a different. As Azerbaijani was trying to advance further, and that they speak pretty fluently. But in Armenia, I guess because the national language is so well promoted, they do have a little bit of accent, but it's not.
I mean, the other thing is that because there are so many different languages here, I'm sure, as Ralph has pointed out before, this is an area where you have 5 major language families. You have the Indo-European language family. You have the Kardvelian language family, which is the Georgian dominant family. You have the Turkish family, right? You have the Northern Caucasian family. You have the Lesgic family. So all these 5 families are in the same area, and in addition to that, you have numerous different languages. So Russian basically became the lingua franca of the region, and so most people speak Russian just to get around, because unless you're speaking to somebody from your ethnic group, the only way you're going to understand them is Russian. Okay. In 1988, because of glasnost, you began to have a number, which is the Russian, which was the Soviet policy introduced by Gorbachev, that led to an increase of freedom of expression in the Soviet Union. Many of these conflicts became more and more entrenched. And the people of Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast could see that the Soviet Union was breaking up and did not want to be part of Azerbaijan Republic. So they pushed a referendum in the fall of 1988 to be part of Armenia, as Armenia would become independent. And the referendum, of course, passed overwhelmingly by the population of the Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast. However, the Azerbaijani government at that time, led by the Azerbaijani government at that time decided that it would not accept Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast becoming independent, and so there were numerous riots throughout Azerbaijan, as well, because the Azerbaijani people did not want Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast seceding from Azerbaijan. They considered it legitimate Azerbaijani territory, and so there were riots in Baku and Sumgait, as well as in Nagorno-Karabakh region, which led to war breaking out. And yeah, I'll switch it over to you, Aaron.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, so let me just get stuff organized here. Oh, so before we get into this, why don't we do any questions right now, because of all the history, before we get into the sort of their phase of beating the hell out of each other.
Exactly.
Do we want to open things up for a few minutes of questions, just because there's so much history here.
Yeah, I got one if you
How
don't
it sort of defines the conflict, and it's the same, or not the same, but you can have a lot of the similar dimensions that you have in the Balkans, Slavics, Serbs, the special histories. Everyone has a special narrative, basically.
Yeah, it's Dave. I have a question concerning the scholars of those regions and the literary scholars, and actually, what language did they write in?
Concerning, like, when you say the scholars,
like, a lot of people take credence in literature.
Ava is mostly Russian. Mostly
okay.
Russian, yes.
Yeah.
Everything was written in Russian. Very rarely it was written in the indigenous language. I mean, you're talking about Pasternak not able to promote his, Dr. Zhivago. Are they going to let somebody write in Armenian that was not promoted, or Azeri?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But when you say scholarship, like, are you talking about people who are writing today, or are you talking about the documents that were written historically?
Historically, I guess.
Sure. Historically, you have a mix of languages. The predominant language is Persian. You have some stuff in Latin that was being sent from the Christians, or Latin or Greek, that was sent from the Christians in the West to Armenia. But as concerns the Muslim sources, almost entirely in Persian. A few things in Arabic, because a number of the dynasties before they became Iranic were Arab, right, related to the caliphates. And you had Russian stuff, especially starting in the 19th century when this area came under Russian control. It became almost exclusively Russian, which is still is to this day. And Armenians and Azerbaijanis still write in Russian because they know that the other side can read it.
Okay.
Right?
All right.
Richard, I don't know. I always have the feeling that the Armenians, they are always all over the world, and there are communities of Armenians. Is the same thing with the other side, or not?
With the Azerbaijanis? No,
Yeah.
the Armenians, because the large size of the Armenian Empire historically, and the fact that Armenians tended to pursue educated fields, they formed diaspora communities quite easily and quite commonly. And it also helps that their empire was divided in half, right? So the Azerbaijani ethnicity is, to the extent that it is a coherent ethnic group, is really a development of the 19th and 20th centuries, because before that point, these people were just called Tatars. And of course, there are Tatars all over Russia, right? There's Tatars in Crimea, there's Tatars in eastern Ukraine, there's Tatars north of this area, in the northern Caucasus region. Yeah.
So somebody is sleeping.
Looks like.
Wake up!
Wasn't me.
That's how we roll, baby. That's how we roll.
Can I ask about religion in these territories, and what are they Muslim, Eastern Orthodox, or?
Armenians are what are called apostolic, but the Armenian Apostolic Church is Oriental Orthodox. I don't know how familiar you are with the distinction from Eastern or okay. There were 7 ecumenical councils at the founding of the church. The 7th of those councils was the Council of Chalcedon, and the Council of Chalcedon made clear the diaphysitic nature of Christ. There were a number of churches that rejected this. The diaphysitic nature of Christ is hard to describe, but basically the best way to imagine it is, and Christians will crucify me for this, but whatever. Imagine that the relationship between God, the godness of Jesus, and the humanness of Jesus is like an oil slick. You can't take the oil or the water out of the oil slick without the meaning evaporating, but the oil and water do not mix. Whereas the Monophysites said that there was only one substance between the nature of godness and humanness of Jesus. So think of it like saltwater Jesus, right? You can't pull the salt water apart in the same way that you can pull the oil and water apart in the oil slick. And in the same way, salt water doesn't make sense if you take away the salt or the water. So the Armenians were on the saltwater side of this debate. They were on the Monophysite side of this debate. And so they were ejected from the unified church for rejecting the Council of Chalcedon. There were a number of other churches that were also this way, such as the Assyrian Church of the East, such as the Ethiopian Tawhido Church. But these churches tended to be in the East, so they became called the Oriental Orthodox. Eastern Orthodox was a division that happened from the Unified Church roughly 400 to 500 years later. So Armenians are Oriental Orthodox, and they're very proud about their orientation. Azerbaijanis are Shiite Muslim. However, because of the Sovietization of their form of Islam, it is very distinct from the way that it's practiced in Iran. One of the key differences is that there are no marja in Azerbaijan. In Shiite Islam, there are ayatollahs, and ayatollahs are very similar to bishops. They control a territory, and they are responsible for the constituents in that territory from a spiritual and taxation perspective, right? In terms of tithing and the rest of it. The marja is an ayatollah who is responsible for issuing jurisdictionally bound religious juridical opinions. So Iran has several marja. who control different areas of the country. There are Marja in Lebanon, for example, to respond to the Shiite population there. But Azerbaijan does not have these Marja, which means that there is no unifying juridical opinion in Islamic law that applies to the Shiite Muslims of Azerbaijan, which leads to basically local imams having a lot more religious clout, but at the same time, those local imams are far more susceptible to political pressure from the Aliyev government, right, than a larger organization like a Marja would rule could fight back with. So it creates a much more homogenized and secularized version of Shiite Islam that exists elsewhere in the Shiite Muslim world. There are Christian minorities in Azerbaijan. There are Muslim minorities in Armenia. There are also Christian minorities in Armenia and Muslim minorities in Azerbaijan, but those minorities are very small.
I just wanted also to add, for comparison, there are probably as many Azari in Iran as there is in Azerbaijan.
Sure. It's
very-
actually more.
very
There are
interesting
about
how
15 million Azeris
maybe
in
more, right?
Iran,
Yeah,
and there are about 9 million in Azerbaijan.
right. So it's really interesting.
But
So I
that's
guess the
because
question
Russians cut the
stems.
region in half. It's not because there was like this mass diaspora fleeing or whatever.
I guess the question stems then, why does Iran support Armenia and not Azerbaijan?
Well, we're going to get into that when we talk about the regional players in this field.
Exactly.
But at this point during the Nagorno-Karabakh War of 1988 to 1994, there are several reasons. The first one is that Iran and Azerbaijan disagree on the situation in Israel, meaning that Azerbaijan actually has a strong diplomatic relationship with Israel, a high degree of trade with Israel, and Iran sees it as their archenemy. So that's reason number one. Reason number two, Azerbaijan and Turkey have a very strong relationship, and Iran is always very skeptical of Turkey, especially because it's a secular republic. Those things, the Azerbaijan-Israel relationship is not really changing much. It's actually improving. The Iran-Turkey relationship, however, is improving, which means that is not as much of a counterweight. And the third reason was that the Azerbaijanis in Iranian Azerbaijan and the Azerbaijanis in the Republic of Azerbaijan did not have close connections during the Soviet period. The border was very strong and communications were very limited. Since we've moved roughly 30 years since independence of the Republic of Azerbaijan, those connections are much tighter, and Iranian Azerbaijanis are much more familiar with the situation than they were before. Finally, because of the U.S. sanctions on Iran, Iran has very few trade partners that it can openly meet with, and Armenia is one of the countries that has never imposed an economic or social restriction on Iranians. So that's helped Iran sort of have a steam valve somewhere that they can export to. All right, any more questions?
So
One
now,
quick question.
go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, no, sorry. Today, I mean, Turkey and Iran, they are kind of closer because it's less, Turkey is less secular or not?
That's certainly part of it. The desecularization of Turkey is part of it. Another part of it is that Iran and Saudi Arabia have been fighting a conflict, right? And one of the pieces of that conflict has been Qatar, right? Qatar has maintained historically good relations with Iran and with Saudi Arabia, but the Saudis were not having it starting in 2017. And so Iran became the de facto supporter of Qatar, and the Turks provided military support to Qatar. So the Iranians saw that as a rapprochement. The Turks have also condemned the Saudi actions against the Houthis, which are Iranian supported in Yemen. And Turkey's condemnation of the Saudi conduct there is also pleasing to Iran. So and Turkey is also distancing itself increasingly from Israel, which was another issue that the Iranians had with Turkey. So all of these movements on the Turkish side have made Iran less wary of Turkey. They're still not anywhere close to making an alliance, let's say, but they're much less hesitant about Azerbaijan's relationship with Turkey being a negative factor in their relationship with Iran.
Also, I think the fact that they're in Syria, they're in cooperation and that's a big factor.
In Syria, Turkey and Iran are on opposite sides.
And also Turkey is Sunni and Iran is Shia. That's another. But yeah. What Richard said is probably more important overall. You know, yeah, there are for and against. Yeah, but
you know, it also helps that Erdogan is making a lot of money with the smuggling of goods outside of out of Iran.
Right. I have a question regarding when Armenia declared an independent republic before the Soviet Revolution, and therefore, you know, Turkey and particularly was afraid that they will let the Russian troops through, obviously, even prior to the revolution. So how much of the factor they were pissing off Turkey because of the factor that they were thinking that Russia will come through of those two factors?
You're talking about 1918 or you're talking about 1991?
1918.
Okay. The Turks in 1918 were pressing on the borders of Armenia. If we go back, let me see if I can find the map. Okay, here we are. If you look at this map, right, you can see that Kars Oblast and Batum Oblast, I don't know why it says Oblast, it should be Oblast. Batum Oblast were territories that the Russians had taken from Turkey, as well as parts of the Governorate of Erivan, from the Turks in the War of 1878. I think it's the fourth or fifth Russo-Turkish War. And after that war in 1878, those territories were under Russian control. The Turks now knew that the Russians were weak enough that they could push that advantage. And so they began to attack, and they brought Kars Oblast and half of Batum Oblast under Turkish direct control. And they fought with the Governorate of Erivan near the city of Jumri, which Jumri is due north of the O in Governorate of Erivan. So if you just look slightly north of that, that's where Jumri is. And at Jumri, there was an area called Sardarabad. The Armenians were able to come together and hold off the Turkish advance there. They were actually successful in making a last-ditch stand to prevent the Turks from coming and taking Armenia. And so because of that, the Turks had to begin pressing north. And by that point, the Bolsheviks were able to come down south, conquer the territories, and force Turkey to an armistice, which was the armistice at Mudros, which preserved the Russian control of the Southern Caucasus, the Soviet control at that point of the Southern Caucasus.
Richard, I'm just curious, how do you find all these maps? Where do you look? I mean,
well, it helps that I know what I'm looking for, right? So like, I looked for like Armenian map before genocide. Oh, look, there we go.
Something like that. Okay.
Yeah, but I know what I'm looking for. So when I see the map that looks the certain way, I'm like, oh, this is the map based on the 1897 census. Oh, this is the map based on the borders in 1991. Oh, this is the map based on this.
Putting it on Google, more specific.
Yeah. One second, Greg. I just wanted to point out an interesting fact. I mean, we'll get back to the maps, but did you know that during the Russian Revolution, after Lenin actually helped the Republic of Turkey with the supply of the weaponry, and it's a big issue right now on a lot of the talk shows, with Adrag. Yeah, it's crazy issue right now with Russians. I mean, because it's such a nationalistic thing. So we used to help Turkey, now look, they're against us. What's happening here?
Yeah. No. The reason that the Bolsheviks were able to stop the Turkish advance was through negotiations. There was never direct conflict between the Bolsheviks and the Turks. That's why the armistice was signed. The Turks were willing to receive support in exchange for pacifying that border, especially when in the West, Turkey had to deal with all of the occupying allies, the British, the French, the Italians, and the Greeks in fighting their war for independence. So they were very happy to sign an armistice in the East to get to control the West, which was much more populated and also much more desirable, much more industrialized. Okay, any other questions? All right, Aaron, it's your game.
Okay, great.
Just a second, a question. So during World War I, Turkey sided with Germany.
Correct.
Now, was that done mainly because of opposition to Russia? Was that the main? I guess that was the main conflict. Turkey versus Russia was the main conflict of that reason. And that's why Turkey sided with Germany, because Germany was against Russia.
Yeah, the Ottoman Empire was asked to join the Triple Entente and rejected joining the Triple Entente specifically because Russia was a member of that alliance. And so the Germans and Austro-Hungarians approached, but primarily the Germans approached the Ottomans about allying with them, and the Ottomans were hesitant. The reason the Ottomans were forced into the war was that the Ottomans had bought a German boat. I think it was a destroyer, but it may have been a smaller boat than that. But they bought this boat from the Germans, and they bought it with all the German personnel on board because the Ottomans didn't actually know how to steer it. So they were going to explain to the Ottoman Navy how to take advantage of this larger ship. And it just so happened that while the ship was flying the Turkish flag, but with an entirely German staff, the Germans bombarded a British boat that was in the area. So the British declared war on the Ottoman Empire from that damage, and the Ottomans were basically forced to become part of the Central Powers.
Yeah, just clarification, Richard, it was actually a battle cruiser. It was a lot bigger than a destroyer.
Thank you.
It's the Emden.
Yeah. So, yeah. All right, Aaron, I guess it's your show now.
Yes. So what I'm going to do here, can you guys see my screen okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Wait,
So I'm going to...
I should probably stop presenting because I feel like I'm presenting.
Yeah, you need to
Oh,
unshare
you'll see
first.
Richard's screen.
Oh, okay.
Oh, it was good.
Oh, okay, you got it.
Yeah, that's it.
Does it say historical overview?
Yeah, you
Yeah.
got it.
Okay, cool. So what I'm going to do here is be a little different than our normal presentation. Zach, we'll see if you're cool with my my fusion cooking. So what I'm going to do is there's a lot of great stuff out there that I wanted to bring in. Al Jazeera has had some good stuff, Euronews, a bunch of, just a bunch of stuff. And I wanted to play some of that, like snippets of that, little pieces of that at the same time, kind of go through the slide deck and then also just kind of open it up because this is obviously more of the conflict stages, which we could get, kind of lost in, especially when you get small conflicts, which in the context of, galactic wars that we've covered, this is a small conflict by those terms, even though it's affected obviously millions of people and in essence tens of thousands have been on each side fighting at any point in time. I mean, actually fighting, not the sizes of their so-called militaries, but actually engaged. So I can cover some of those, sort of mixed urban sort of mini battles too, but I just think getting kind of this larger view of the region and then also what you guys might be interested in. I mean, one of the areas that I find most fascinating about the whole conflict, which really isn't talked about much, in some ways it's a very large natural resources play, old school, a balance of power, a great game. Not quite that sophisticated, but it has a lot of those components because there's, large pipelines that are proposed. There's some that sort of partially crisscross the region. There is, a mammoth level of water in play, like any other region in conflict, which has a lot of natural water resources. But the water resources are really big. And so, there's mining and, and the usual. And so that does have a piece to this that I don't think it sort of gets overshadowed by, by the big players and by, on and off conflict at a large scale, like we just saw happening the last, 7 weeks. So if that works for you, I can go there. If not, I can pivot. So I'm going to leave it up to you guys. So a couple things to kick it off, just to have a little bit of fun. This is a really good quote I got from an Armenian political scientist. The optimist learns English, the pessimist learns Chinese, the realist learns Kalashnikov. And that's sort of, gallows humor. I'm sure it's been repeated. I'm sure the political scientist took it from someone else in the region. And Azerbaijan is also known as the land of flames because of the oil. It's under the waters in the Caspian Sea. So, it's something to sort of never forget, that it isn't just this kind of conflict between Armenia and over Azerbaijan, which is almost like Lebanon in some ways, like a micro version of it. It's that there's an enormous amount of resources there. And then I found this one to be pretty funny, and the sign on the door in a Palace Hotel. I should have brought it in. It was in Russian, but handguns are acceptable. Semi-automatic weapons must be checked at reception. So it tells you this is a real place. Where it's, definitely has some risk. So before I kind of dive in, and I wanted to give you kind of a backstory of the disintegration, because I think it's easy to just say the USSR sort of disintegrated and then the conflict started, right? There was obviously a whole bunch of mechanisms going on in that disintegration that I think people didn't really consider. So any questions before we get going? And if not, let me know if you could see the screen right now. Can you guys see that? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I'm just going to play this for a few minutes, and I can stop at any point in time.
I thought we were gonna have an episode of Kardashians here. No, was it?
No.
No. She looked Arab to me.
But but this is a really nice. I mean, she did a great job, and the people who produced this did a really good job in sort of tying the history together and what's happening, or what was happening at present when this started. I think this was about a month ago. So let me play this real quick, and let me know if you guys hear it okay, and we're okay.
It's called Nagorno-Karabakh, and the fights between our...
You guys hear okay?
We do hear it.
Yes.
Okay. Good.
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. And I'll stop at any point in time. Just shout out.
Armenia and Azerbaijan.
A flare-up of one of the world's oldest conflicts is raising fears of all-out war.
Soldiers and civilians are being killed.
Life has moved underground in Stepanakert.
Once the machine of war started, it gets incredibly dangerous. These two sides have very long-range weapons.
So why are they fighting? How long has it been going on for? And why are countries like Turkey involved?
I don't know why that was needed, but that's okay.
The first shots were fired in July before all-out war broke out at the end of September. It's been the worst fighting there in 25 years, but the grievances go back generations. At the heart of the dispute is a region called Nagorno-Karabakh, and here it is in a crowded neighborhood known as the South Caucasus. Nagorno-Karabakh lies entirely within Azerbaijan's borders. It's internationally recognized as being part of the country, full stop. Here's the thing, it's controlled by ethnic Armenians, backed by Armenia. And surrounding Nagorno-Karabakh are lands that Armenia controls. The UN calls it an occupation. Then you've got all the big neighbors, like Iran, which borders both. Turkey, it's long been an ally of Azerbaijan. And then there's Russia. It supplies weapons to both Armenia and Azerbaijan. We'll get into all the geopolitics later. But first, here's what Nagorno-Karabakh looks like. It makes up 5% of Azeri territory, but almost twice that much land around it is controlled by Armenian forces. About 150,000 people live here. It holds its own elections and governs itself. But right now, it's a war zone. Many people are living in their basements because of the shelling, and local officials say half the people who live there have been forced to leave. The thing about this region is that it's been fought over for a long time. Iran had control in the mid-18th century, then the Russians took over. The British and the Ottomans were in there too. But a key date in all of this is 1920. That's when Armenia and Azerbaijan went to war over Nagorno-Karabakh. And Azerbaijan, backed by Russia, got control. A year later, it was promised to the Armenians, But Stalin turned around and made sure Azerbaijan held on to it. By 1988, the Soviet Union was crumbling, and the Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh took advantage of the power vacuum and voted to join Armenia. So when the Soviet Union finally fell apart in 1991, so did whatever was left of peace in the South Caucasus.
What the collapse of the Soviet Union did was then to militarize this conflict. Both sides suddenly got much bigger weapons.
1992 was when the fighting really intensified, right after Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh declared independence. Both sides accuse each other of atrocities. Tens of thousands of local Azeris and Armenians were killed. 1 million people had to leave their homes. In the end, the Armenians pushed Azerbaijan's forces out of Nagorno-Karabakh, seized territories around it, and it all finally ended in a ceasefire in 1994. That ceasefire has been ignored by both Armenia and Azerbaijan over the years. And the sense of injustice over what happened in that war, the killings and mass displacement, hasn't gone away.
This conflict has always been kind of put on the back burner. There's always the danger of some terrible incident causing a new escalation, in which case things could get totally out of control, given the huge amount of weaponry we have on both sides.
And now, both sides are tapping into that anger. It's full-scale war all over again. Trenches, tanks, air attacks.
Air raid sirens wailed across the city as a barrage of rockets and mortars rained down.
Azeri forces have been attacking Nagorno-Karabakh's main city, Stepanakert. Armenian men there have been signing up to fight back. Exact numbers are next to impossible to come by, but soldiers and civilians on both sides have been killed. Armenian forces have been attacking Azerbaijan too. The border city of Ganja has been among the hardest hit.
The second rocket hit the other street, and there are also 2 other wounded people over there.
So how and why did the fighting start up again? The answer depends entirely on who you ask. Armenia says Azerbaijan attacked first. Azerbaijan says it acted in self-defense. What's clear is that it's not exactly an even fight. Our colleagues at AJ Labs put together these infographics to show just how much more Azerbaijan spends on its military, how many more soldiers it has, and how much more artillery. And the Azeris have been pulling it off. This is an actual music video released by the Azeris.
Yep, sorry.
Yeah, can you put that frame again about the difference in the armies and the
Sure.
monies?
Absolutely.
Because I think that's a good number.
Yep.
What's clear is that it's not exactly an even fight. Our colleagues at AJ Labs put together these infographics to show just how much more Azerbaijan spends on its military, how many more soldiers it has, and how much more artillery.
Oh, sorry, let me go back one here for a second.
How many more soldiers it has, and how much more artillery.
All right, so that gives you a sense that Azerbaijan spends 5 times more on the military. That's independent of aid that obviously they're getting from Turkey.
And in population too, there are these different. I mean, this is the difference between the 2 countries, or?
There's definitely a population.
Yeah, 3 times
Yeah.
bigger. Azerbaijan 3 times bigger than Armenia.
Yeah, Armenia is about 3 million in population. Azerbaijan is about 9 million in population.
Exactly.
Could I ask a question here? I mean, my impression is in the first round in 1992, the Armenians dominated, and now the Azeris are dominating. Why the change in the power relations between the 2 of them?
Sure. There's several different things that are going on. The first one is that the Armenians had the high ground starting in 1988, right? Because they were controlling Nagorno-Karabakh, which gave them a slight advantage. The second was that even though Azerbaijan had more advanced weapons even in 1988 and a larger number of weapons even in 1988, they were not technically capable of using them effectively. So
Exactly.
their helicopters were shot out of the air pretty quickly, and then they were, which was demoralizing. Another major difference is that Azerbaijan, over the last 20 to 25 years, has been exporting oil through the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline, and that oil wealth has allowed Azerbaijan to buy increasingly more advanced technological equipment. This, combined with their stronger alliances with Turkey and Israel, which did not exist in 1988. I mean, they were friendly with Turkey, but Turkey was not actively engaged in the war. That meant that Azerbaijan could get more quality equipment and learn how to use more quality equipment. Most, and I think Aaron will discuss this, most of the early waves of attack from Azerbaijan were led by drones, which is something that Azerbaijan, of course, in 1988 could not have done. And so the Armenian tanks that were holdovers from World War II were a very effective fighting force from the Armenian side that the Azerbaijanis could not effectively repel. Whereas in this campaign, the drones were able to take out Armenian tanks relatively easily, preventing an Armenian effective defense.
Yeah,
Can I
and
add one more thing here?
Sure.
One more caveat. I think in the earlier wars of like in 92, 94, the Russians, they supported both sides, but they supported more Armenians because they felt that they are at disadvantage and they wanted to level the fields. Now, the Russians have better relationship with Azerbaijan, and even though they do support Armenia, eventually they have a alliance with Armenia, so they're obligated to support them. But that's only if the Armenia proper gets attacked. But the thing is that there is a grievance right now exists because Armenians ousted the pro-Russian president and put Pashinyan, contemporary president, who is a pro-Western. And Russians have a lot of grievances against Armenians that now you don't want to be pro-Russian, but now when you need help, would you ask for help? So they're unwilling to do this, and they also don't want to spoil their relationship with Azerbaijan that became very more prominent right now because of the oil and connection.
There is one more factor. Turkey supplied several thousand, or maybe more than several thousand, maybe in terms of tens of thousands, Syrian fighters who were fighting in
SNA.
Yeah, they are now fighting for Azerbaijan, and they attributed a lot of success in fighting was attributed to them.
Yeah, and back in 93, 94, I mean, you know, everyone has this sort of, you know, this would actually be a good one eventually when we do stuff in the US, but the Hatfield and the McCoys type of fight that sort of, you know, at a certain point, it's just, you're fighting off of, you know, grievances that are grievances from other grievances. I mean, it's just this spiral of grievances that just goes on forever. So the Armenians were able, through obviously Russian support, primarily retired Spetsnaz, they were able to get some mujahideen from Afghanistan, which, you know, was incredible circular logic because they were fighting, you know, Azaris, but it was a Turkish thing, right? The Turkish Sunnis versus, you know, mujahideen from Herat, from basically Western Afghanistan. So, you know, you had these, you know, these very, these Rubik's cubes of, and what was really critical was the Armenians were able to bring a lot of the fight to the mountains. So a lot of the superior advantage that the Azaris had or should have had went away, and then it turned much more into a mountain fight. And the Azaris weren't as proficient as you know, both the combination of the Russian mountain fighters. There was I forgot the name of the Russian. There's a Russian. The U.S. has a 10th Mountain Division. There's a version of that in Russia, and I forgot the name. What the name of that division was, but there was members from that division that were retired that supported them, and then with the Afghan fighters, it gave them a tactical advantage. And then there was a lot of government turnover on the Azerbaijani side also, and so they went through a few ministers of defense, and I mean, so it was sort of a mess. It was more of a mess, let's put it that way, on the Azeri side than it was on the Armenian side, and that gave them an advantage.
So it's not like the tanks. It's all more air.
Yeah, I mean now. Yeah, now you mean now or then?
Now.
Oh yeah, now this is I mean, you could argue that up until this, last couple months, you haven't really seen a modern war outside of the large powers, right? Either Russia, the United States, maybe Turkey to some degree, applying combination of drones, air power, this sort of 2.0 warfare that we're in now, which is very hybrid. The Azerbaijanis are acting as a proxy now of that. I mean, this is they're sort of like if you look at it as like a product, it's like a proof of concept almost. And obviously the Turks are giving them, incredible technical assistance, which they've, obviously learned from the last 5 to 8 years in Syria. And they're, they're flexing basically. And so, and the Azeris, as Richard pointed out, they did not, they set themselves up that if this was ever going to happen again, that they were far better prepared. And I have a little video after. It's not a video. It's the music video. So I'm going to skip the music video because you really do want to watch some of the music video. A
quick formula to this: Azerbaijan's is 21st century army versus Armenian 20th century army.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I would absolutely say that. The risk we run into, which we'll get into later. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's a very good way of putting it, because
the risk is that Armenia could shift and probably will shift into a far more low intensity guerrilla mode, especially after the scale of their defeat, because they basically. I mean, they basically just got wiped out the last 2 weeks. I mean, on the modern battlefield to a pretty unique level that you haven't seen since, ISIS running over, forces or the United States or other allies or even in Libya, you haven't. It took a long time to get to this draw that they got to. So
that's why they have the treaty too. I mean, that's why they,
yeah.
One thing is, Aaron, just quickly add one. So prior to Pashinyan, there was a lot of nationalistic or Karabakh movement leaders. For example, Robert Kacharian and all other presidents were very pro-war type of presidents. Now with Pashinyan coming in, now Russia is screaming.
Also Artsakhi. Robert Kacharian and Serge Sargsyan were both born and lived in
Karabakh.
In Karabakh.
Yeah. So Pashinyan is right now a new wave of Western Soros type of supported presidents, and therefore is not very interested in this pro-nationalistic move of safeguarding, Karabakh, and that's the general that's a prospect in Russia that basically he wanted this to happen so that you can get rid of that part of the opposition to his presidency.
Yeah, I mean, that's
very dangerous, which is very dangerous.
Yeah, it's, I think, even by Russian standards, extremely cynical. If I was going to say, I mean, look, there's 17 political parties in Armenia, and roughly 4 you could call fairly ultra-nationalists. And they have, strong ties back to, they're called like Karabakhtists almost. I mean, they're people who, have this very strong attachment to, the whole Karabakh sort of culture and to its sort of revival and its, let's call it it's almost like a cultural phenomenon. And it's like a regenerative history almost. Given the scale of this defeat and how fast and how, and remember, there's one thing when you lose slowly and you tend to clear out, basically through soft ethnic cleansing, population centers, because the fighting just, goes on and on and on over years. When you have a massive dislocation like that, or a massive defeat like this, you do get a massive dislocation. And now you're talking about, in essence, Azaris controlling an area that is, in essence, 75 to 95%, Armenian, and it starts to look very Yugoslavian, right? It starts to look where you're going to have just good old fashioned ethnic cleansing going on. And I don't know how you're not going to get a revival movement in Armenia. I mean, if somehow that doesn't happen, that will be amazing. But I wouldn't bet against that, right? I mean, I just believe when you have, another 50, 100,000 or more, 100, 150,000 people showing up back in your country, which by, our standards would be, millions of, tens of millions of people, they're going to have stories, right? It's going to be this will be the new narrative. This becomes the new life grievance, how we lost our place, our historical memory.
I also want to add, if you remember from the history, Karabakh was an area that was always majority Armenian, and Nagorno-Karabakh was always majority Armenian. At Ivan Khanat, right, we talked about how the Russians repopulated it with Armenians in the 19th century. So, so for many Armenians, Karabakh is more Armenian than Armenia proper. And so this loss is a very emotional, symbolic loss, as well as the loss of territory. Many of the oldest monasteries that still survive in Armenia, with the possible exception of Echmiadzin, which is their Vatican, are in this region, are in Nagorno-Karabakh. So it's a very emotional thing for them as well.
Absolutely. So let me just go, because I'm going to play that little video after for a second, which is just wild when you watch it. So I'll do that after. But let me just finish this out for a few more minutes, and then we can. Then I'll go to the deck after that for a little while. Then I'll pop back for one other thing.
The Armenians are rallying their people too. But what's making this particular fight different from all the other skirmishes is that other countries are getting involved in a big way.
Azerbaycanlı kardeşlerimizin işgal altındaki topraklarını kurtarma ve vatanlarını koruma mücadelelerinde yanlarında olduğumuzu belirtmek istiyorum.
Part of Turkey's connection to Azerbaijan is cultural. The Azeris are a Turkic-speaking people.
We call ourselves one nation, two states. What happens there, of course, is of direct concern to us. It affects, our borders. It affects our region.
It's got the Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh looking for outside help too.
If there is also a direct involvement of Turkey, and I don't see that Turkey is going to pull out from the region, we have to somehow, change some geopolitical approaches of our state, further strengthen our relations with brother countries, Russia, United States, Iran, and China.
So how involved is Turkey in the actual fighting? Well, that's difficult to pin down. Azerbaijan's using military drones supplied by Turkey and Israel, and Turkey's accused of recruiting Syrian fighters to help against the Armenians, which Turkey and Azerbaijan flatly deny.
There is no evidence of the so-called Syrian fighters going to Azerbaijan or facilitated by us. There is evidence of Lebanese Armenian individuals, I guess, or militia, going there.
So what's in it for Turkey and Azerbaijan, beyond trying to get back what they see as Azeri land? Well, something to consider is that this region is rich in oil and gas. Pipelines snake across the region. Oil and gas make up 90% of Azerbaijan's exports. And as for Turkey, Azerbaijan is now its biggest supplier of natural gas. So understandably, any instability here is bad for business all around. Azerbaijan accuses the Armenians of attacking a major oil pipeline, which Armenia denies. One thing's for sure, Azerbaijan's oil and gas has come in handy.
That's given Azerbaijan the revenues to build up a new army after it had lost a humiliating defeat back in the 1990s.
The other reason Turkey and Azerbaijan say they support the offensive on Nagorno-Karabakh is that they think the dispute has been allowed to fester, and now is the time to resolve it once and for all.
Our main concern is to find a diplomatic solution to this. But as I said, for this peace to be sustainable, it needs to be based on a plan to end the occupation.
It's true that over the years, there have been lots of negotiations. The UN's put out a bunch of resolutions to stop the fighting, and all the big international organizations have weighed in too, including something called the Minsk Group, led by Russia, France, and the United States. They came close to getting the two sides to agree on a peace plan in 2007, but it fell apart.
The two sides basically never really fully accepted that plan. They were always looking to see if they could just improve their options.
But like all the other plans so far, they've failed to overcome that deep mistrust.
Ateşkes olmasın, onlar da reddolup geçsin, koysun Azerbaycan halkı dinmez dolansın. Ayrı bir şey istemirik.
A ceasefire is good, certainly good, but the problem must be solved. A ceasefire must solve the problem, that is our independence.
But one can completely understand the Armenians saying that we are the majority population. We've lived here for centuries. We're surrounded by Armenian churches and cemeteries, and we don't trust Azerbaijan to rule over us. And you can also completely understand Azerbaijan saying to take away Nagorno-Karabakh is to kind of tear a massive chunk out of the middle of our territory, and that's completely unacceptable.
Both sides accuse each other of terrible things, massacres, ethnic cleansing, and taking land. So it's hard to make peace. Ceasefires only pause the fighting. They don't resolve it. And history has shown that.
All right. So was that good, guys? Did you like that?
Very informative.
Yeah, very, very good. I mean,
Good, good. All right, good. Let me just get.
I just want to point out that nobody aside from the Turkish government has alleged that Lebanese Armenian militias are operating in this territory.
Exactly. No, I mean it's yeah, it's pretty clear that there is a strong SNA, which Syrian National Army types that are there. Hold on, let me get this.
Aaron, so who is on the side of the Armenians now?
That's a really great question.
Yeah,
I'm trying to figure that out right now.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of this blend. Sorry, I'm trying to get this other one here. That's really
historically
good.
it would have been Russia and Iran.
Yeah.
Russia significantly more so, but in this conflict, Russia didn't really intervene until the very late stages, and Iran, if it intervened on the other side.
Exactly.
But only
Also,
diplomatically.
Iran is not in shape to do much.
So I want to show you.
No, Iran, if it wanted to, could conquer this entire area.
Yep.
The Iranian army is the most powerful army in the Middle East, except perhaps Israel. It could smash this region to bits, despite the fact that its general population is starving.
Yeah. But, and the problem is that then what do you do, right? It's just right. Like now you and obviously you're now going head to head with Turkey, and now it starts to create a shift in power in the region. So I wanted to show you this. I don't have to show you the whole thing, but it's so crazy that I just had to show you, because it's a video of the Azerbaijan. It's basically like a rock, sort of like a little bit of if I'm going to be objective, I'm from LA, and so there's a famous band that's Armenian called System of the Down, and so my sense is this is their hack on that. For any of you that might know who they are. So let me just play this for a second and a minute or whatever, and you can just see it's so it's almost like an Indian Bollywood movie soundtrack mixed together.
Avlar yurdu doğma diyar Qədim tarix məbədim sənsən Keşiyində sərkərdən var güneş
That was from the president.
Çok az kalır zaman çatar Bu dünyada hak yerin tapar Torpakların azalırlar Hudutlarda tongallar yanar İntikama çağırır bizi Siz sarılın silahlara koy Mehvolsun düşmanimizi İntikama çağırır bizi Siz sarılın silahlara koy Mehvolsun düşmanimizi Ateş, ateş Her
Not wear any head covering.
Sorry. Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah. One of the things, because somebody asked about the religion earlier, you can notice that the woman who was singing, was not wearing any head covering. She had no hijab.
Yep.
And she actually had very beautiful eye mascara.
And she had a great weave.
Yeah, exactly.
It would cost like $500, like for real. So, you know.
So I just one of the things about the secularization of Azerbaijan under the Soviet period is that even though that they are Muslims, they don't present physically like most of the Muslims elsewhere in the region do, especially like Iran.
Yep. No, exactly. So I just wanted to give you a little taste of that. It's I mean, number one, it's obviously you know, incredible production value. You know, it's and you get to see sort of all the modern technology that they have in terms of in essence, sub ICBM level missile systems. You know, basically they're called MLSs, basically. So these are missile launch systems that are legal, you know, amongst different agreements. So, and they have, you know, modern mobile, you know, warfare built by the Turks and the Russians and in some degree by the Israelis. So what I wanted to do is sort of dive in a little bit with the background and then jump right into the sort of war in 92. Is that okay with everyone? Or do you guys you have other questions or?
Don't worry, we'll interrupt you.
Okay, you interrupt me. So, are
you going to be singing the rest of the time?
You know, I'm a terrible singer. So no, I mean, they could sing and she had actually a fantastic voice. But no, I you don't want to hear me sing. That's just, all right. So I know we covered a lot of maps earlier, which Richard has some fantastic maps. So the disintegration of the USSR. So the 15 Soviet republics became independent. They became the legal successor state to the Soviet Union with obligations, debts, assets. This is sort of important around the relationships that they built and how they had leverage with most of the republics, basically. You know, and because they acted sort of like the blended central bank treasurer that kept the receipts while all of those states were standing themselves up. And you know, and early on they really, you know, some of them had some basket case currencies. I mean, they just, you know, they basically rublized, and they maintained a rubleization of their economy, or they dollarized it. You know, and so Russia really maintained a lot of connectivity after the disintegration, which was obviously going to happen. I mean, many people spoke Russian, if not all, whatever, 90% of the population. I mean, it would be like, whatever, not quite like the United States disintegrating and, whatever, the Midwest staying a country or something, but, it's in the same sort of league.
The other thing that I would like to point out is that significant portions of population from the non-Russia republics, the other 14, with the exception of the Baltic states, had family that were working in Moscow or St.
Right.
Petersburg.
That's exactly
In fact,
right.
if you look at Tajikistan, 53% of the GDP of Tajikistan in 2018 was composed of remittances. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's arguably the equivalent of El Salvador, right? Where you have just this huge remittance population, both from Mexico now and from the United States, obviously.
There are also 1 million Armenian citizens in St. Petersburg alone, and the surrounding area, that are sending money back to Armenia. So the currencies being strongly tied makes perfect sense when you realize under those conditions.
Yep, exactly. After the end of the Soviet Union, or actually not, at the end of the breakup of the USSR, I guess that would be the right way to put it legally. You had a whole bunch of new associations and treaties and unions and communities that were developed, most of which were almost all Russian led, of course, except the SCO, which is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So the ODKB, which is I cannot pronounce anything in Russian, but it means Collective Security Treaty Organization in Russian, for those of you that speak Russian. So Armenia was a party to this, Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan and Belarus, but Azerbaijan wasn't. They were obviously held back by Turkey. I mean, Turkey, as their foreign minister basically said, it's two states, one people, right? I mean, that's how they project that, and that's this larger overlay on this conflict, which, if we're going to be blunt, the Turks have to be careful here, right? Because they have a very recent history of grossly overshooting.
Aaron, I'm sorry. Can you explain that these two one people, two states? Because
Richard, if you want to go down that path for a second, you can definitely run on that one. So if you see where Turkey is, and you see where Azerbaijan is, and you see where Armenia is, right? So they view themselves sort of in this relationship as a Turkic peoples. My sense is that while it's true for many people, it's also good marketing, right? It's a combination, like almost anything like that. I mean, I'm sure there's enough Azerbaijanis who get tired of that. I'm sure not right now, but when the Turks want to cash the check, which I'm sure they're going to want to do pretty soon, I'm sure you'll start to get some pushback from some quarters in Azerbaijan. Richard, do you want to add more to that, or
what that Turkey's going to expect payback? I actually don't think that that Azerbaijani people will be opposed to cementing a further alliance with Turkey. I think the issue will actually come from the Aliyevs, because the Aliyevs have maintained an extremely secular government.
Yep.
And Turkey, as it's becoming increasingly religious, may make requests, first of all, that Azerbaijan increasingly turn towards the Sunni side, and make requests that Azerbaijan permit more religious diversity, because right now religion is an operation of the state. You have to have legal permission from Azerbaijan to build religious institutions.
Yeah.
So I think that may be a harder bridge to build than the cultural one.
Well, what's kind of fascinating about, and it just tells you how important this is, whether it's politically important, geographically. I mean, that the geographic ones sort of make sense at a practical level, or it does make sense, but that they're willing to take on allies, really any allies that are going to help them achieve what they want to achieve here. and reintegrate or attempt to reintegrate. To me, the largest risk they run into is, and I have another map here on the pipelines. If, to be really blunt, you cannot guard pipelines. I mean, it's impossible, right? It's like if ants want to get in your house, they're going to get in your house, right? It's the same principle, right? You'd have to have all the armies in the world together trying to stop something from happening to a pipeline, because a pipeline by nature is just very long, and it tends to be in an area that is not incredibly dense population wise. And so the risk they run into is that, given how important energy is to Azerbaijan, that you could get some very effective guerrilla attacks against the pipeline and the non-installations and the installations. And then that could trigger a very different response from both Turkey and Azerbaijan. To me, that is, I want to say that's the highest risk. I think it's one of the higher risks that you have going forward, because if the Azerbaijanis were smart, this is the moment to cut let's call it the least fair deal so the Armenians can save a little bit of face.
Aaron, I'm sorry. So the pipeline was done when the Soviets were there, right?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah.
There were pipelines built during the Soviet period. However, the pipelines during the Soviet period went through Azerbaijan, through Armenia to Turkey. They didn't go through Georgia to Turkey, right? Because at this time, of course, Armenia and Azerbaijan were forced into this lost Soviet unification.
But what was the purpose? I mean, for the Russians, why? I thought the pipeline was serving them.
Yep.
Why?
So no, it's serving the Turks.
No, because it's almost impossible to get a pipeline over the Caucasus Mountains.
Exactly.
There are some pipelines. There's a gas pipeline, as you can see here, that goes across the Caucasus Mountains. But to get oil up the mountains is really hard.
Yeah. Oil's heavy. so the physics don't work well.
Yeah. So the Russians transported it actually in trucks.
Yeah.
From Baku if they wanted it north. But the thing is, they didn't need to, because there was much easier oil to extract in Kazakhstan, and the geography is flatter. But the thing is that during the Soviet period, the pipelines went from Baku through Armenia because it's a quicker direction to Turkey. But considering the lack of relations between Azerbaijan and Armenia as a result of the Karabakh War from 1988 to 1994, Azerbaijan basically paid Georgia to build a pipeline that would run parallel to the former Armenian connection and go back to Turkey, which became the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan being in Turkey pipeline.
Yep.
What I don't get is why the Soviet Union participated or helped when was nothing for them, or what was for the Soviet Union with the pipeline? What do they gain? I mean, why did
you mean the Russians now or then?
No, the Russians when they did the pipeline was when the Russians were there. So what did the Russians gain with the pipeline?
Well, remember, so you have what you call, the equivalent of pipeline wars, right? It's like a whole nother little sub segment of geopolitics, where your goal is to, let's say, limit or water down or make off balance one of your strategic competitors, which Turkey and Russia are absolutely strategic, and Iran, of course, are strategic competitors when it comes to energy. And this region, which obviously the Caspian and the larger fields in the whole across the whole region, are in essence the largest fields deposits, if not part of the largest deposits as you go south, all the way. I mean, this whole, this box here is like $50 trillion worth of energy, or some crazy number. And so, the Russians obviously, both because they have technology, they have ability to export into Eastern and Central Western Europe. and they're not a member of OPEC in the traditional sense at all. So that gives them this flexibility.
Aaron, sorry, I'm not sure, but if my memory serves me right, this pipeline through Georgia was built after the dissolution of the Soviet Union.
Yep.
So it was done by Azerbaijan. They didn't consider Russia. Russia couldn't do anything about this.
Well, no, you're right.
That makes sense because why they would do
Azerbaijan wanted to sell their oil around Russia.
Yes, no, you're right. Well, actually, the Turks wanted to. So the Azerbaijanis are the ones, but you have the original one that went to Russia also. So obviously, they didn't minimize their production to Russia, because then that obviously would have put them at risk with Russia, because they border with Russia. That probably wouldn't have been an intelligent decision on their part. So they just expanded their market, which is important to understand. And then obviously Iran, right? So Iran has gets capacity from Azerbaijan also to the Caspian. So in sort of a strange way, the way the Gulf is in North America, that's sort of how the Caspian exists, right? You have, just like you have Venezuela, you have Mexico, you have obviously the United States, you have even Colombia, you have, so you have, 4, 5, 6 actors that are leveraging the energy in the whole region through the Gulf. The Caspian is really the same. I mean, Caspian's far bigger, obviously, in terms of the output it has is probably 10 times, or if not more, 20, 30 times bigger. But just, I wanted to give you the sense of how important the pipelines were to all of this. Okay, so yeah, so we'd already talked about this. But yeah, so they have a currency called the dram, which I'm sure is worth a lot right now. I'm sure they're rublizing as much as they can.
I mean, the dram is just the currency of Armenia.
Yeah.
Karabakh doesn't have its own currency.
Yeah, but I'm saying the dram is probably not doing really well right now. I could do a search, but all right. Let's see. We talked about this. Let me go back to this back here. Sorry for a second. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so we talked about just how the dissolution or how the breakup happened across all the trans Caucasians, which is pretty important, obviously, because this conflict, though, and I do believe what makes this conflict different is the embedded territoriality of the conflict, which is the fact that this territory is embedded in another state. And I think that's what makes the conflict even more intense, basically. So let me go back. Sorry, I wanted to get that oil picture for you guys, the energy, and so I flew through a bunch of stuff here. Let me go back here. So yeah, so here's some of the populations. Did you have this map too, Richard, or no?
I didn't have this map. Because I didn't get one for this time period.
Okay, no, that's fine. So I just so this builds on our discussion we had earlier. So you could see some of the other populations that you have, across the whole region. I'm actually studying more about like the Avars and the Kachurs. Is that how you pronounce it properly? Kachur? I'm sorry?
Kachur.
Okay, Kachur. Yeah, so I'm actually reading about them because I just find it, it's fascinating.
Yeah, no, you have all of these mountainous peoples who aren't large enough to have their own country, but still exist within these territories.
Exactly. And that's Georgia, wrong one. And then this is a very Ralph-friendly
language
map because it breaks out the Caucasian people, Indo-Europeans, and the Atlantic peoples.
Altaic.
Okay. Yep, exactly. Turkic. And then I had another one here for the alphabet, the Azerbaijan change in sequence in the 20th century from
the first Arabic script to the first Latin script to the Cyrillic script imposed by the Soviet Union to the new Latin script, which is very similar to the old Latin script, but not exactly the same.
Okay. So now, and I'm wondering about this. So in Azerbaijan, do people, well, so how close is that to Turkic?
Well, Turkic is the category. So Azerbaijani language.
Well, to what's spoken in Turkey. That's what I'm trying to say.
Between Azeri Turkish and Istanbul Turkish, as Greg pointed out, there is a degree of mutual intelligibility, but it's not perfect. There are a lot of words in Azeri Turkish that are influenced by Russian and maintain older styles of Perso-Turkish grammar that have been largely edited out of Istanbul Turkish because of Ataturk's reforms. And of course, Istanbul Turkish doesn't have a strong Russian influence. It actually has a strong French influence in the modern period.
Okay. So it would be like someone with a Cockney English accent talking to someone from old Italian Brooklyn in English.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it.
It would sort of get there, but there'd definitely be a lot of language.
The other thing is that you have to realize is that Istanbul Turkish, while being the official language of Turkey, is not the local language in many parts of Turkey. So especially as you moved into the eastern parts of Turkey, like Rize and Trabzon and these sorts of cities along the Black Sea coast, the language that they speak in their homes is actually closer to Azeri Turkish than it is to Istanbul Turkish. There's sort of this rainbow effect that you sort of this gradient that the closer you get to Azerbaijan, the more like Azeri Turkish people actually sound when they're not speaking officially.
Great, awesome. And then I had the Armenian one here too. The Georgian, and then there was
the Georgian language is not related to any language outside of the Caucasus region, and the Armenian language, while being an Indo-European language, is extremely distant from almost every other Indo-European language. Think like Albanian, for example, or Greek, how it's not related to anything.
Hey, Aaron and Richard, do you guys want to do this next Wednesday? I'll move my
sure.
I'll move the Joseph Flavius, the Jewish Wars, to the following week.
How much do we have now? I mean, how much more?
I mean, I haven't done this is just like the Pacific War. I've done I keep doing everything but the fighting. And so, it's like
next Wednesday. But what I want to do next Wednesday, we'll go.
I probably have about 40 minutes to an hour in terms of, because I was going to talk about the Artsakh government, how it's organized. I was going to talk about the
and I have the same percentage of time. I have probably about 40 minutes to an hour, so that covers it well.
Sounds exactly right. Yeah, let's do it.
Yep.
So let me Wednesday. I'm doing the next Wednesday at 7:00.
Okay, and one quick thing here, Richard. So, and I had never heard of this.
Kartvelian is simply the Georgian word for Georgian.
Oh, okay.
In Georgian, the word for Georgia is Kartul. So, well, actually, Sakatvelo is the name of the country. So Kartvel, so Sakatvelo.
Okay.
It's just the Georgian word for Georgian.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, in Russian, what would a Russian say Georgia is? Would you just say Georgia or
Georgia?
Okay.
All right. Oh, one more thing. Just wanted to, before we jet out, I apologize. Aaron, if you can prepare a piece for tomorrow for Bitcoin and blockchain, I know it's too soon, but I just need 2 slides.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll do it. Do you want me to do
and Bitcoin? Yeah, tomorrow.
You want me to do what a ledger is? Like stuff like that, like basics?
Well, we just need people to understand what blockchain is, and what Bitcoin is.
So, and by the way, I'll do that. And this is the money also. So this is the Armenian dram. And then
I think if you go back, I think that maybe Ejmiazdin, which is but my Armenian is bad. It's a pity they don't write anything in Russian. But I think that is Ejmiazdin, which is the sort of the Vatican of the Armenian Church.
Yeah.
It's in Artsakh?
No, it's in Armenia proper. It's about a 20 to 30 minute drive west of Yerevan.
Yeah, my friends. So whenever we would do any type of, I grew up with celebration like our Armenian. They didn't do Christmas like we do it 25th. It's it's like all the dates are old world dates, and they had these small replicas of this, and so and a bunch of other churches and sort of meaningful places of history. It's definitely old world, right? Like
Is this on the Lake Sivan? This one? Is this because I know there is a big church on Lake Sivan?
If it is Din, then it wouldn't be on Lake Sivan. But there is a very famous church called Sevanavank, which is in the middle of Lake Sivan. There's like a peninsula that goes out into the lake, and it sits on that peninsula.
Okay.
And then here was this was some more of it basically. So what else did I have here? Yeah, okay, yeah. So yeah, so I'll oh yeah, and you know what I'll do? So how many more minutes are we done now, or do you
I think yeah, we'll stop recording.
I'll stop.
And,